Blood dripped from Sheriff Kane Blackwood's knuckles as he stood over 3 unconscious men in the moonlight, his eyes still glowing amber, but it was the terrified woman cowering behind the overturned stagecoach who made his heart stop. The scent of her fear hit him like a physical blow, cutting through the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder. She pressed herself against the wooden wheel, her dark hair wild around her shoulders, one hand clutched to her throat where a silver locket caught the moonlight. Kane forced his breathing to slow, willing the amber fire to fade from his eyes before she could see. Too late. Those wide green eyes had already witnessed too much. "Miss, are you hurt?" His voice came out rougher than intended, the wolf still too close to the surface. She didn't answer, just stared at him with those impossibly green eyes, her gaze flicking between his face and his bloodied hands. The scent of lilacs and fear wrapped around him, making his pulse race in ways that had nothing to do with the fight. Earlier that evening, Evangeline Murphy had stepped off the evening stage with nothing but a carpetbag, a letter of introduction, and the desperate hope that Thomas Brennan would be the answer to her prayers. Instead, he'd taken one look at the scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw and declared her damaged goods in front of half the town. "I ordered a wife, not some broken thing," Brennan had sneered, his words cutting deeper than any blade. "Find yourself another fool, miss. You won't be warming my bed." The humiliation had burned like acid in her throat as she'd walked back to the hotel, every whisper and sideways glance a fresh wound. She'd used her last dollars to hire a wagon out of town at first light. She couldn't stay in Silverbrook territory, not with the shame of it following her everywhere. The bandits had been waiting just past Miller's Creek. 3 of them, stinking of whiskey and violence, had appeared out of nowhere to overturn her wagon and send the horses bolting into the darkness. The largest one, a bear of a man with rotten teeth, had grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. Well, what do we have here?" His breath had been hot and foul against her face. Pretty little thing, even with that scar. She'd fought them, clawing and kicking, but she was 1 against 3, and they were strong. When the biggest one had torn her sleeve, she'd screamed, a sound of pure terror that echoed across the empty landscape. That's when he'd appeared. Sheriff Kane Blackwood had materialized out of the shadows like something from a nightmare, moving faster than any man should be able to move. Evangeline had seen him in town earlier, impossible to miss with those broad shoulders and that stern, handsome face, but now he was something else entirely. Something dangerous. He'd torn the first bandit away from her and sent him flying 20 feet to crash into a tree. The second man had drawn his gun, but Kane had been on him before he could fire, those powerful hands closing around the man's throat until his eyes rolled back. The third bandit had run, screaming about devils and monsters, but Kane had caught him in 3 strides, despite the man's head start. Now they lay motionless in the dirt, and she couldn't tell if they were breathing. "Miss Murphy." Kane's voice was gentler now, more controlled. "You're safe." He knew her name. Of course he did, the whole town probably knew about Thomas Brennan's rejected bride by now. The shame of it made her cheeks burn, but she lifted her chin. She'd survived worse than gossip. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But how did you, the way you moved?" "Adrenaline." The lie came smooth as silk. "Makes a man capable of surprising things." But Evangeline had grown up in Boston, had seen her share of street fights and police raids. She'd never seen anyone move like that. Never seen wounds close themselves before her very eyes, the way the gash on Kane's cheek was already fading to a thin pink line. Kane extended his hand to help her up, but she flinched back instinctively when she saw the silver chain of her locket had somehow gotten tangled around her wrist. His whole body went rigid, his nostrils flaring slightly as his gaze fixed on the small cross pendant. "Your necklace," he said carefully. "It's pretty." "It was my mother's." She untangled the chain with shaking fingers, tucking the locket safely inside her torn bodice. "Pure silver. She said it would protect me." Something flickered across his face, pain, maybe, or something closer to hunger. Did she now? The way he said it made goosebumps rise along her arms. There were stories, old stories her Irish grandmother used to tell about creatures that feared silver and holy things. But those were just tales to frighten children, weren't they? Kane stepped back, putting careful distance between them. I'll take you back to town. You can stay at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house until you make arrangements. I can't afford. I'll see it's taken care of. His tone brooked no argument, but there was kindness in it too. No woman should be alone on these roads at night. As he helped her into his saddle and swung up behind her, Evangeline caught his scent, pine and leather and something wild and clean like mountain air. His body was warm and solid against her back, his arms strong around her as he guided the horse through the darkness. But when she turned to thank him, she caught a glimpse of his profile in the moonlight. For just a moment, his features seemed sharper, more angular. Predatory. And when he smiled down at her, she could swear his canine teeth looked longer than they should. Rest easy, Miss Murphy, he murmured against her hair. You're under my protection now. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. As they rode toward the distant lights of Silverbrook, Evangeline couldn't shake the feeling that she'd escaped one danger only to fall into the arms of another. Behind them, the three bandits began to stir, groaning as consciousness returned. But by then, the sheriff and his mysterious charge had disappeared into the night, leaving only questions and the lingering scent of lilacs on the wind. In the darkness of the forest, something howled, long and mournful and achingly beautiful. Kane's arms tightened around her, and Evangeline felt his heart hammering against her back as fast as her own. Just a coyote, he said, but his voice had gone rough again. Evangeline nodded and tried to ignore the way the sound had seemed to call to something deep in her bones. Tried to forget how Kane's body had vibrated with tension at the first note, as if he'd been fighting the urge to throw back his head and answer. Whatever Sheriff Kane Blackwood was hiding, she had a feeling her quiet life was about to become very complicated indeed. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. The boarding house was full. Mrs. Patterson stood in her doorway like a fortress wall, her iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun that seemed to drag the disapproval right up from her toes. I'm sorry, Sheriff, but I simply haven't got room. What with the railroad surveyors in town and all. Kane's jaw tightened. Behind him, Evangeline sat his horse with the careful stillness of someone trying to disappear entirely. He could smell her exhaustion, could hear the way her breath hitched just slightly with each inhale, a sure sign she was fighting tears. Mrs. Patterson, perhaps the young lady could try Widow Morrison's place. The older woman's gaze flicked over Evangeline with barely concealed distaste. Though I hear she's particular about references. The dismissal was clear as crystal. Kane had seen this before, the way decent folk turned cold when scandal touched someone, as if misfortune might be catching. His hands curled into fists at his sides. That won't be necessary, he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made grown men step aside. Miss Murphy will be staying at my cabin. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows shot toward her hairline. Sheriff Blackwood, surely you can't mean, I mean exactly what I said. Kane turned back to his horse, effectively ending the conversation. He could practically hear the woman's scandalized intake of breath, but he didn't care. Let the whole town gossip. He'd survived worse. As they rode through the sleeping streets, Evangeline finally spoke. You don't have to do this. I can find somewhere else. Where? The word came out harsher than he'd intended. You heard Mrs. Patterson. And the other boarding houses will be the same. I could leave town. Find work somewhere else. Kane's hands tightened on the reins. The thought of her alone on the road, vulnerable to every predator, human or otherwise, made something primitive snarl inside his chest. Not happening. You don't even know me. That was where she was wrong. Kane knew the courage it had taken to fight three armed men with nothing but her bare hands. Knew the pride that kept her chin lifted even when the whole town whispered about Brennan's rejection. Knew the way she smelled like wildflowers and determination, and how her pulse had fluttered like a trapped bird when he'd held her close. What he didn't know was why those green eyes held shadows deeper than any 20-year-old should carry. "My cabin's 2 miles out of town," he said instead. "It's quiet. Private. You'll be safe there." The word safe seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment she looked impossibly young. "I don't know why you're being kind to me." "Because you're mine," his wolf whispered. "Because I'd burn this whole territory down before I let anyone hurt you again. Because it's the right thing to do," he said aloud. Kane's cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, their branches black against the star-scattered sky. It was larger than Evangeline had expected, 2 stories of solid timber with a wide porch and windows that gleamed like watchful eyes. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and warm light spilled from the downstairs windows. "It's beautiful," she murmured, meaning it. Kane's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "My grandfather built it. Said a man needed space to think out here." He helped her down from the horse, his hands spanning her waist with careful gentleness. For just a moment they stood there, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body like a banked fire. Then he stepped back, breaking the spell. "Come on. Let's get you inside." The interior was warm and inviting, decorated with simple furniture and colorful Indian blankets. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. But it was the books that caught Evangeline's attention, shelves and shelves of them, everything from legal texts to poetry collections. "You read Tennyson?" she asked, pulling a worn volume from the shelf. "You sound surprised." Heat crept up her neck. "I didn't mean, that is, most men out here don't read poetry." Kane moved to the fireplace, adding another log with practiced ease. "Maybe not. But my mother insisted on a proper education, even out here. Said civilization wasn't about where you lived, but how you chose to live." There was affection in his voice when he spoke of his mother, but something else too. Loss, maybe. Pain. Evangeline replaced the book carefully. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. Kane straightened, brushing bark from his hands. "I'll show you to your room. You must be exhausted." He led her up a narrow staircase to a small but comfortable bedroom with a window facing the forest. The bed was covered with a quilt in shades of blue and green, and someone had already laid out fresh towels and a pitcher of water. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything. I'll find a way to repay you, I promise." Something flickered across his face, so quick she almost missed it. "No need. Just get some rest." He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Evangeline? The doors have good locks, but if you hear anything at all, you call for me. Understand?" The intensity in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. What kind of anything? But he was already gone, leaving her alone with nothing but questions and the sound of his boots on the stairs. Evangeline woke to the smell of bacon frying and coffee brewing. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, revealing a view of the forest that took her breath away. She'd slept better than she had in weeks, despite everything that had happened. Or maybe because of it. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. She dressed quickly in her spare traveling dress, the blue wool that brought out her eyes, or so her mother had always said. The thought of her mother sent a familiar pang through her chest, but she pushed it aside. She'd learned long ago that grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Kane was at the stove when she entered the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He'd obviously been up for hours. There was fresh bread cooling on the counter, and he'd already collected eggs from what must be a chicken coop somewhere. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned, and something in his expression made her breath catch. The way he looked at her, as if she were something precious and fragile and completely essential to his world, made her heart stutter in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "Morning. Hope you're hungry." She was, actually, ravenous. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal. Kane piled her plate high with eggs and bacon and thick slices of bread dripping with honey. The coffee was strong and hot, and she had to bite back a moan of pleasure at the first sip. "This is wonderful," she said. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." Kane settled across from her with his own cup of coffee. "No trouble. I like cooking." They ate in comfortable silence, but Evangeline found herself watching him. The way he moved with fluid grace despite his size. The way his head tilted slightly when a bird called outside, as if he were listening to something she couldn't hear. The way his eyes tracked every shadow that passed by the windows. "Kane," she said finally. "Yesterday, when those men attacked me, how did you find me?" "I was miles from town." His hand stilled on his coffee cup. "I was patrolling. Heard the commotion." "From that distance?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Sound carries at night." It was a reasonable explanation. So why did she feel like he was lying? The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Kane would leave each morning to handle his sheriff duties in town, while Evangeline explored the cabin and its surroundings. She discovered the chicken coop, a well-tended vegetable garden, and a small barn that housed Kane's horse along with a milk cow named Bessie. What she didn't find was any trace of another woman's presence. No feminine clothing, no delicate touches in the decor, no photographs of sweethearts or wives. For a man in his prime, Kane Blackwood lived a surprisingly solitary life. She also began to notice things. Strange things, like the way he always seemed to know when she was approaching, even when she tried to be quiet. The way he could identify visitors by their horses' hoofbeats from half a mile away. The way wild animals, deer, rabbits, even the occasional fox, showed no fear of him whatsoever, and the howling. Every night, just after sunset, something in the forest would sing that haunting, beautiful song. When she asked Kane about it over dinner on her fourth night at the cabin, he'd grown tense and changed the subject. "It's just coyotes," he'd said, the same words he'd used that first night. But coyotes didn't sound like that. They yipped and barked. This was something else entirely, something that seemed to call to a part of her she didn't understand. The sound made her dream of running through moonlit forests, of wild freedom and pack bonds and a belonging so complete it took her breath away. She'd wake with her heart pounding and the taste of the hunt on her tongue, which was ridiculous because she'd never hunted anything in her life. On the fifth morning, she was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard horses approaching. Kane was in town, wouldn't be back for hours. She'd grown comfortable in the isolation of the cabin, but now unease prickled down her spine. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, and Evangeline's blood turned to ice. She recognized the man in the lead immediately, Marcus Thornfield, though he looked nothing like the daguerreotype he'd sent her. Where the photograph had shown a distinguished gentleman with kind eyes, the reality was a man gone soft around the middle, with cruel lips and predator's eyes. Thomas Brennan rode beside him, along with a third man she didn't recognize, someone hard-faced and dangerous-looking with a gun at his hip. "Well, well," Thornfield called out, swinging down from his horse with practiced ease. "If it isn't my runaway bride." Evangeline's hand went instinctively to her throat, where her mother's locket rested beneath her dress. "Mr. Thornfield. I wasn't expecting you." "I'll bet you weren't." His smile was cold as winter. "Thought you could take my money and disappear, did you?" Heat flooded her cheeks, but she lifted her chin. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Thornfield pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Funny thing about bank drafts, Miss Murphy. They leave quite a trail when someone cashes them. Especially when that someone uses false papers to do it." Evangeline's mouth went dry. She'd been so careful, had planned every detail. How had he found out? $500, Thornfield continued, moving closer. A significant sum for wedding expenses. Dress, flowers, a nice little nest egg to start our married life. Money you stole. "I didn't steal anything." The words came out stronger than she felt. "That money was payment for services to be rendered. Services you decided you didn't want." Brennan snorted. "Services? That's a pretty name for it." "Shut up, Thomas." Thornfield's voice cracked like a whip. "Miss Murphy and I have business to discuss." He turned back to her, his eyes cold as chips of flint. "The way I see it, you owe me. Either you return my money, or you honor our original agreement." "I can't do either of those things." "Can't? Or won't?" He was close enough now that she could smell the expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of corruption underneath. "Because I think you'll find I can be very persuasive." The third man, the gunslinger, shifted in his saddle, his hand resting casually on his weapon. The threat was unmistakable. "There's a third option," Thornfield continued, his voice dropping to a silky whisper. "You come with me now, willingly, and we'll call it even. I'll even overlook the theft." "And if I refuse?" His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Then we'll discuss it with the sheriff. I'm sure he'll be interested to hear about his houseguest's criminal activities." Panic clawed at Evangeline's throat. She'd worked so hard to build a new life, to escape the shadows of her past. She couldn't let it all fall apart now. Not when she was so close to being free. "I need time to think." "Time's up, sweetheart." Thornfield reached for her arm. "You're coming with me." That's when the growling started, low and menacing. It seemed to come from the forest itself. Thornfield jerked back, his head swiveling as he tried to locate the source of the sound. His horse pranced nervously, ears flattened against its skull. "What the hell?" Brennan began, the sound of hoofbeats cut him off. Kane appeared through the trees like an avenging angel, his face a mask of cold fury. He took in the scene at a glance. Evangeline pressed against the cabin wall, Thornfield's hand still reaching for her, the gunslinger's weapon half drawn. "Gentlemen." Kane's voice was quiet, deadly. "You're on my property." Thornfield straightened, trying to regain his composure. "Sheriff Blackwood. How convenient. We were just discussing your houseguest's legal troubles." Kane dismounted in one fluid motion, moving with that same inhuman grace Evangeline had noticed before. "Were you?" "Indeed. It seems Miss Murphy absconded with a considerable sum of my money." "Theft, I believe you'd call it." Kane's gaze flicked to Evangeline, and she saw something wild flicker in the depths of his eyes. "That's so, Miss Murphy?" She wanted to lie, wanted to deny everything. But something in Kane's expression, patient, accepting, almost understanding, made her tell the truth. "Yes," she whispered. "I took the money. But not for the reasons he thinks." "Doesn't matter why," the gunslinger spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly from years of whiskey and tobacco. "Theft is theft." Kane turned his attention to the hired gun, and Evangeline saw the man actually flinch. "And you are?" "Jake Morrison. Mr. Thornfield's associate." "Mr. Morrison." Kane's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I suggest you keep your hand away from that gun. I'd hate for there to be an accident." Morrison's hand jerked away from his weapon as if it had burned him. Even from 20 feet away, Evangeline could see the sweat beading on his forehead. Thornfield stepped forward, trying to reassert control. "Sheriff, as a law-abiding citizen, I demand you arrest this woman for theft." "Do you now?" Kane's voice was conversational, almost friendly. But there was something underneath it that made every horse in the clearing sidestep nervously. "And I suppose you have proof of this theft?" "Bank records, correspondence, witness statements, all of which would need to be examined by a judge. Due process, you understand." Kane moved closer to Thornfield, and the older man actually took a step back. "Funny thing, though. I spoke to Judge Harrison yesterday. Seems he's going to be tied up with that railroad dispute for the next few weeks. Won't be able to hear any new cases." Thornfield's face flushed red. "You can't just ignore the law." "I'm not ignoring anything. I'm following proper procedure." Kane's smile widened, showing just a hint of teeth. "Of course, if you'd prefer to wait in jail while we sort this out." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Evangeline could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could smell the fierce sweat from the three men facing Kane down. There was something about the sheriff in that moment, something predatory and barely contained, that made every instinct scream danger. Finally, Thornfield gathered the shreds of his dignity and climbed back into his saddle. This isn't over, Sheriff. I have friends. Connections. People who don't appreciate lawmen who forget their place. Kane's expression didn't change. I'm sure they don't. Give them my regards. As the three men rode away, Kane stood perfectly still, watching until they disappeared into the forest. Only then did he turn to Evangeline, and she was shocked to see how much effort it took him to rein in whatever was simmering beneath the surface. Inside, he said quietly. Now. She wanted to argue, to explain, but something in his voice brooked no argument. She went. Kane followed her into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, his hands gripping the wooden edge so hard his knuckles went white. When he finally looked at her, his eyes held flecks of that strange amber she'd seen the night he'd rescued her. How much? He asked. $500. The words came out as barely a whisper that he nodded, as if he'd expected as much. And what did you need $500 for badly enough to steal it? Evangeline wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon. She'd never told anyone the whole truth, not even Father Mackenzie back in Boston, though he'd probably guessed, but something about Kane, the way he protected her, the way he was looking at her now without judgment, only patience, made her want to be honest. I had debts, she said finally. Debts that belonged to someone else, but became mine when he died. Dangerous debts to dangerous people. The kind of people who don't care if you're not the one who borrowed the money. Kane's grip on the counter tightened. What kind of debts? Gambling debts. My stepfather had problems. When he died, the men he owed money to decided I was responsible for his obligations. She touched her scar unconsciously. They made it very clear what would happen if I didn't pay. Understanding dawned in Kane's eyes, followed quickly by a rage so pure and fierce it made her take a step back. For just a moment, his features seemed to shift, becoming sharper, more predatory. When he spoke, his voice carried an undertone that raised every hair on her body. They hurt you. It wasn't a question. Evangeline nodded, not trusting her voice. How badly? Badly enough that I knew they meant business. She forced herself to meet his gaze. I tried to earn the money honestly, but no one would hire me. Not with the scar. So when Marcus Thornfield's advertisement for a mail-order bride appeared in the paper, along with money for traveling expenses, she trailed off, ashamed. You saw an opportunity. I saw survival. The words came out fiercer than she'd intended. I never planned to actually marry him. I was going to take the money and disappear. Start over somewhere new, somewhere they'd never find me. Kane was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle again, all traces of that frightening edge gone. What's your real name? The question hit her like a physical blow. What? Evangeline Murphy. It's not your real name, is it? How had he known? She'd been so careful, had practiced the identity until it felt natural. But Kane was watching her with those two knowing eyes, and she found herself nodding. No. It's not. What should I call you? For a moment, she considered lying again. But she was so tired of running, so tired of being someone she wasn't. And something about this man, this dangerous, protective, impossibly gentle man, made her want to trust again. Evangeline is real, she said softly. It's Murphy that's borrowed. My real name is Evangeline Rose O'Malley. Kane smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Evangeline Rose. It suits you. You're not angry? About the deception? Honey, we've all got secrets. Something flickered across his features, too quick for her to interpret. What matters is you're safe now. But even as he said it, Evangeline wondered if that was true. Marcus Thornfield didn't seem like the type of man to give up easily. And there was something about Kane himself, something wild and barely contained, that suggested safety might be an illusion. As if summoned by her thoughts, that haunting howl echoed through the forest. Kane went rigid, his head turning toward the sound with an intensity that made her shiver. "Just coyotes," he murmured, but his voice had gone rough again. Evangeline nodded and tried to pretend she believed him. But deep in her bones, she knew that whatever was calling from the darkness was no coyote, and from the way Kane's hands had begun to tremble where they gripped the counter, she suspected he knew it too. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 3. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet after Marcus Thornfield's visit. Kane found himself watching Evangeline with new eyes, cataloging the careful way she moved through his space, the intelligent observation in her green gaze, the competent manner in which she'd treated a cut on his hand when he'd slipped with the wood axe, that she'd cleaned the wound with the efficiency of someone who'd done such work before, her fingers gentle but sure as she wrapped the bandage. When he'd healed completely within hours, something that should have taken days, she'd said nothing. But he'd caught her studying his hand with a puzzled frown. Now she stood at his kitchen window, watching him chop wood in the early morning light. Even from here, he could sense her restlessness, the way tension coiled beneath her calm exterior like a spring wound too tight. Kane buried the axe in the chopping block with more force than necessary. 3 nights of lying awake listening to her breathe, fighting the urge to go to her, to claim what his wolf insisted was rightfully his. 3 nights of cold showers and iron control while every instinct screamed at him to make her his mate. The wolf didn't understand that humans were fragile. That the claiming bond could kill her if her body couldn't handle the change. That even if she survived, she'd be tied to him forever, and to a life of secrecy and danger. Kane had seen what happened to human women who tried to mate with werewolves. The lucky ones died quickly. "Kane?" Evangeline's voice carried across the clearing. "Could you come inside? There's something I need to discuss with you." The formal tone set his nerves on edge. He found her in the kitchen, standing stiffly beside the table with her hands clasped in front of her. She'd pinned her dark hair back severely, and the style emphasized the delicate line of her scar. "What is it?" She took a shaky breath. "I haven't been entirely honest with you. About who I am. What I am." Kane went very still. "Go on." "My name is Evangeline Rose O'Malley, that part is true. But I'm not just a woman fleeing an abusive situation." Her chin lifted with familiar pride. "I'm a physician. Dr. Evangeline Hartwell. I graduated from the Women's Medical College of Chicago 2 years ago." A physician. Kane's mind reeled. No wonder she'd been so competent treating his injury, so observant about his accelerated healing. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because women doctors aren't exactly welcomed with open arms, especially out here." Her laugh held no humor. "And because of why I left Chicago." "The debts?" "No. That was a lie." She moved to the window, staring out at the forest. "I left because I treated a patient who died. A patient whose injuries should have killed him days before he made it to my clinic, but somehow hadn't. A patient who healed before my eyes, then died anyway when his body couldn't handle whatever was changing inside him." Ice formed in Kane's veins. "What kind of injuries?" "Claw marks. Deep gouges across his chest and back, like he'd been mauled by a massive animal. But the wounds were already closing when he arrived." She turned back to face him, her green eyes steady and knowing. He kept talking about the moon, about how he could hear his pack calling. And right before he died, his body started to change. Kane's hands curled into fists. "Change how?" His bones began to elongate. His teeth grew sharper. Hair sprouted across his skin. Her voice was clinically detached, but he could hear the underlying tremor. He was becoming something else. Something not entirely human. "And you think I know what you are, Kane." The words hung between them like a blade. "The accelerated healing, the enhanced senses, the way animals react to you. The howling at night that calls to something deep in your bones." She stepped closer, her gaze never wavering. "You're a werewolf." The admission should have terrified him. Should have sent him into damage control mode, crafting denials and explanations. Instead, Kane felt an odd sense of relief. No more lies. No more careful pretense. How long have you known? I suspected from the beginning. I was certain after I treated your hand. She sat down heavily at the kitchen table. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Kane studied her face, looking for signs of fear or revulsion. He found neither. Only exhaustion and a strange sort of resignation. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, she corrected. But not of what you are. I'm afraid of why that patient died despite his supernatural healing. I'm afraid of the people who will come looking for me when they realize what I know. She met his gaze squarely. And I'm afraid that my presence here has put you in danger. Evangeline, there's more. She pulled a folded newspaper clipping from her reticule, smoothing it out on the table. I've been watching the papers. Looking for any news from Chicago. Kane leaned over to read the headline, Wanted, Dr. Evangeline Hartwell for questioning in mysterious death. Below it was a detailed description and an offer of a substantial reward. They're calling it murder, she said quietly. Claiming I experimented on my patient, that I caused his death through unorthodox medical practices. Her hands trembled slightly as she refolded the paper. But I know the truth. They want me because I witnessed something I shouldn't have. Because I can identify what killed that man. Kane sank into the chair across from her. What did kill him? Another werewolf. One whose claws carried some kind of poison or disease that prevented proper healing. She looked up at him, her green eyes fierce with determination. I want to help, Kane. I want to understand what's happening to your kind, and I want to find a way to stop it. It's not safe, I'm not safe anywhere else. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. I know about medicine, about anatomy and physiology. I could help your pack, treat injuries that might otherwise prove fatal. All I ask in return is protection from the people hunting me. Kane stared down at their joined hands, his mind racing. Having a physician who understood their nature would be invaluable. The nearest doctor who knew about werewolves was 3 territories away, and they'd lost 2 pack members last winter to injuries that should have been treatable, but bringing Evangeline deeper into his world would expose her to dangers she couldn't imagine. Rival packs, territorial disputes, the constant threat of discovery by humans who wouldn't be as accepting as she was, and there was still the matter of his own attraction to her. The way his wolf recognized her as mate, the way her scent called to every protective instinct he possessed. There are things you don't understand, he said finally. Dangers, I understand more than you think. Her grip on his hand tightened. That patient, before he died, he told me about pack law. About territorial boundaries and challenges. About what happens to humans who learn too much about your world. Kane's blood chilled. What did he tell you? That most packs kill humans who discover their secret. But that some have other uses for them. Her cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady. He said I smelled like mate bond, whatever that means. Kane jerked his hand away as if she'd burned him. The patient had been right. Evangeline did carry the scent markers that would identify her as a potential mate to any werewolf with functioning senses. It was probably why she'd been targeted in the first place, why the dying wolf had sought her out despite his injuries. Evangeline, the sound of approaching horses cut him off. Multiple riders, moving fast and with purpose. Kane's head snapped toward the window, his enhanced hearing picking out details Evangeline would miss. 8 horses, maybe more. Heavy breathing that suggested they'd been riding hard. The metallic scent of weapons and the sharp tang of determination. Stay inside, he ordered, moving toward the door. Kane, what? Stay inside and lock the door behind me. He stepped onto the porch just as the riders crested the hill. Marcus Thornfield led the group, but he wasn't alone. 3 men in dark suits rode beside him, their badges glinting in the morning sun. Federal marshals, behind them came 5 more men Kane didn't recognize, but whose scent made every hair on his body stand on end. Werewolves. But not from his pack or any allied territory. These carried the musk of violence and barely contained aggression that marked them as rogues. "Sheriff Blackwood," Thornfield called out, his voice carrying smug satisfaction. "We're here on official business." One of the marshals spurred his horse forward. He was a lean man with cold eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "I'm Marshal Davidson, and this is Marshal Creek and Marshal Williams. We have a federal warrant for the arrest of one Dr. Evangeline Hartwell, wanted in connection with a murder in Chicago." Kane kept his expression carefully neutral. "I'm not harboring any fugitives, Marshal." "Are you sure about that?" Thornfield's smile was sharp as a blade. "Because I have it on good authority that the woman calling herself Evangeline Murphy is, in fact, the wanted physician." "Your authority being?" "Sources I trust implicitly." Thornfield gestured to the rogues behind him. "Friends of mine who are very good at tracking people who don't want to be found." The rogues shifted in their saddles, and Kane caught the unmistakable glint of silver weapons. Not just tracking him, then. They'd come prepared for war. "I'll need to see that warrant," Kane said, buying time while he assessed the situation. 8 against 1 weren't good odds, especially with federal law backing Thornfield's play. Marshal Davidson produced a folded document. "Signed by Judge Morrison in Chicago. We have authority to search these premises and arrest Dr. Hartwell if she's found here." Kane took the warrant, scanning it quickly. It looked official enough, though something about the phrasing struck him as odd. Still, he couldn't refuse a federal warrant without cause. "Fine. But I'm telling you, there's no Dr. Hartwell here. Only Miss Murphy, and she's under my protection." "Protection?" One of the rogues spoke for the first time, his voice carrying an undertone that made Kane's wolf snarl. "Interesting choice of words, Sheriff. Almost sounds like you're claiming territory." The challenge was unmistakable. Kane felt his canines lengthen slightly, his vision sharpening as amber bled into his peripheral sight. "I'm protecting a woman who's done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" Thornfield laughed. "She's a thief and a murderer. And you're harboring her like some lovesick, careful." Kane's voice dropped to a growl that made several of the horses sidestep nervously. "Choose your next words very carefully." The lead rogue's nostrils flared, and his lips curved in a predatory smile. Well. Looks like the sheriff's got himself a mate." "How touching." "Stand down," Marshal Davidson ordered, though Kane could see uncertainty flickering in the man's eyes. The marshal might not understand what was happening, but he could sense the tension crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. "I think we should search the cabin," Thornfield said. "Just to be thorough." Kane moved to block their path to the door. "You'll search nothing without probable cause. We have a warrant, for Dr. Hartwell. You have no evidence she's here." The standoff stretched taut, 8 men facing one across a clearing that suddenly felt too small. Kane could hear Evangeline moving inside the cabin, probably trying to find a back way out. Good. If things went badly, she might have a chance to escape. That's when the attack came, not from the front, where he'd expected it, but from the forest behind the cabin. 3 more rogues burst from the tree line, moving with inhuman speed toward the back of the building. Toward Evangeline. Kane's control snapped, the change hit him like a physical blow, bones cracking and reforming, muscles expanding, senses exploding into hyperfocus. He didn't complete the shift, couldn't risk revealing his full nature to the marshals, but his partial transformation was enough. Claws erupted from his fingertips as he launched himself at the nearest rogue. His enhanced speed carried him 20 feet in a single bound, and his claws raked across the werewolf's throat before the man could draw his silver blade. The rogue went down gurgling, dark blood spurting across the cabin's back wall. "What in the hell?" Marshal Davidson was shouting, his gun half drawn, but Kane was already moving toward the next attacker. This one was faster, more experienced. He rolled aside from Kane's strike and came up with a silver knife, the blade gleaming wickedly in the morning light. Kane felt the burn as it sliced across his ribs, but the pain only fed his rage. He grabbed the rogue's wrist and twisted until bones snapped. The knife fell from nerveless fingers, and Kane's claws found the man's heart. The third attacker had reached the cabin's back door and was clawing at the wood with fingers that had sprouted into vicious talons. Through the splintering timber, Kane could hear Evangeline's terrified breathing. Kane hit the rogue from behind with the force of a freight train, driving him face first into the cabin wall. The impact shook the entire structure, and timber cracked under the blow. "Stop." Marshal Davidson's voice cracked like a whip. "Everyone stop now." Kane spun around, his amber eyes blazing, to find 3 federal guns trained on him. His shirt hung in tatters, revealing the wounds that were already healing. His hands still sported claws that gleamed with blood, and he could feel his fangs pressing against his lower lip. The marshals stared at him in shock and growing horror. Behind them, the surviving rogues were backing away, their own partial transformations making them look like something from a nightmare. "Sweet Jesus," Marshal Creek whispered. "What are you?" "The question," Marcus Thornfield said, his voice thick with satisfaction, "is whether you gentlemen are prepared to arrest a monster along with a murderer." Kane's gaze flicked between the federal agents and the rogues, calculating odds and escape routes. The marshals might be willing to overlook what they'd witnessed in exchange for explanations they could accept. But the rogues wouldn't be satisfied with Evangeline's capture. They'd want blood, his blood, specifically. And Evangeline's. The cabin door opened behind him, and Evangeline stepped out despite his earlier order to stay inside. She moved with careful dignity, her chin raised in defiance of the guns pointed in her direction. "Gentlemen," she said calmly. "I believe you're looking for me." Kane's wolf howled in protest as she stepped between him and the marshals, effectively shielding him from their weapons with her own body. "Dr. Evangeline Hartwell," Marshal Davidson said, though his gun never wavered from Kane's chest. "You're under arrest for the murder of—" "I know what I'm accused of," she interrupted. "And I'm prepared to come with you. But first, I have something these gentlemen need to hear." She turned to face the rogues, her green eyes blazing with righteous fury. "I know what you are. I know what you did to that man in Chicago. And I know why you want me dead." The lead rogue's lips pulled back in a snarl. "Careful, little doctor. You're in no position to make threats." "I'm not making threats. I'm making promises." Evangeline's voice carried across the clearing with startling authority. "I documented everything. Every symptom, every stage of his transformation, every detail of his death. And I sent copies of those notes to colleagues in 3 different cities." Kane saw the moment the rogues realized what she was saying. If Evangeline had documented their existence, if she'd shared that information with other physicians, "You're lying," the rogue leader snarled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Am I? Would you like to take that chance?" Evangeline smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. "Because if something happens to me, those notes will find their way to medical journals, scientific institutions, and federal agencies. How long do you think your secret will last then?" The silence stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight. Kane could practically smell the fear rolling off the rogues as they realized the trap Evangeline had laid for them. Then Marcus Thornfield laughed. "Clever girl," he said, applauding slowly. "Very clever indeed. But you're assuming we care about secrecy." "What?" Evangeline's composure cracked slightly. Thornfield turned to the marshals with theatrical regret. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid I haven't been entirely honest with you about why I wanted Dr. Hartwell found." Kane's blood turned to ice as understanding crashed over him. "You see," Thornfield continued, his smile widening to show teeth that were just slightly too sharp, "we don't want to hide from humanity anymore. We want to rule it." The marshals swung their weapons toward Thornfield, but it was already too late. The rogues were changing, their bodies contorting as they embraced their wolf forms. Thornfield's own transformation was fluid, practiced, revealing a creature that was larger and more dangerous than the others. "Kane," Evangeline breathed, terror and realization warring in her voice. Kane grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the forest as chaos erupted behind them. Gunshots rang out, followed by inhuman roars and the screams of men who'd suddenly found themselves facing their worst nightmares. They ran through the trees as the sounds of battle faded behind them, Kane's enhanced senses guiding them through the dense undergrowth. But he knew it was only a matter of time before the rogues picked up their trail. "The pack," he said between gasps of breath. "We need to reach the others." "How far?" 10 miles north. But Evangeline, he stopped running and turned to face her, his hands gripping her shoulders. What Thornfield said back there, about ruling humanity. That's not pack law. That's not who we are. I know. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his skin. I know who you are, Kane Blackwood. And whatever happens next, we face it together. Behind them, something howled, not the mournful song of his pack, but the triumphant cry of predators who'd tasted blood and wanted more. The hunt had begun. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. The howling grew closer with each passing hour. Kane pressed deeper into the forest, Evangeline's hand clasped firmly in his as they navigated fallen logs and dense undergrowth. Her breathing had grown labored over the last mile, but she hadn't complained once, hadn't asked him to slow their punishing pace. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed through the trees, not just the rogues, but something worse. The methodical crashing of men on horseback who knew exactly how to track werewolves. Professional hunters. Kane. Evangeline stumbled over a root, and he caught her before she could fall. How much farther? 2 miles. He studied her face in the dappled moonlight filtering through the canopy. Her scar stood out starkly against her pale skin, and exhaustion shadowed her eyes. Can you make it? I'll make it. She straightened with familiar determination. But Kane, those men back at your cabin, they weren't really federal marshals, were they? Kane's jaw tightened. He'd hoped she hadn't caught that detail in all the chaos, but Evangeline was too observant for her own good. No. They weren't. Then who? A branch snapped somewhere behind them, and Kane's head whipped around. Still distant, but getting closer. He pulled Evangeline forward, picking up their pace again. I'll explain everything once we reach the others, he promised. Right now we need to move. They crested a small ridge, and Kane felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as familiar scents reached his nose. Pine and wood smoke, leather and steel. Home, the pack's sanctuary lay hidden in a natural depression between 3 hills, invisible from any angle unless you knew exactly where to look. Rough cabins clustered around a central fire pit, with larger structures for communal meetings and food storage. It wasn't much to look at, but it had sheltered his people for 3 generations. Stay close, Kane murmured as they descended into the clearing. And let me do the talking. The pack had already caught their scent. Werewolves emerged from the shadows with fluid grace, their eyes reflecting the firelight like amber jewels. Kane counted 12 adults, plus the youngsters who would be hidden safely away until the threat passed. At the center of the group stood Elena Ravencroft, Kane's second in command and the pack's most experienced warrior. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe braid, and her weathered face showed no emotion as she took in Evangeline's presence. Kane. Elena's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. We heard gunshots. Smelled blood. Rogues, Kane said simply. Led by Marcus Thornfield. They had help, professional hunters posing as federal marshals. Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Thornfield's name was known to them, but the mention of hunters sent a visible tension through the group. And her? Elena's gaze fixed on Evangeline with predatory intensity. Why have you brought a human to our sanctuary? Kane felt Evangeline tense beside him, but she didn't flinch under the pack's scrutiny. Instead, she stepped forward with the same calm dignity she'd shown facing down the hunters. My name is Dr. Evangeline Hartwell, she said clearly. I'm a physician, and I know what you are. The reaction was immediate. Several wolves dropped into defensive crouches, growls rumbling deep in their chests. A young male named Thomas actually began to shift, his hands sprouting claws before Elena's sharp bark stopped him. Explain. Now. Elena's voice could have frozen hellfire. Kane moved protectively in front of Evangeline. She saved my life. And she can save ours. By bringing hunters down on our heads? The hunters were already coming. Kane's own authority rang in his voice, reminding them all who led this pack. Evangeline didn't betray us. She's running from the same people we are. I treated one of your kind in Chicago, Evangeline added, her voice steady despite the hostility surrounding her. A werewolf who'd been poisoned by something that prevented his supernatural healing. He died despite my efforts, and now they want me dead because of what I witnessed. Elena's expression shifted slightly. Poisoned how? Claw marks that carried some kind of toxin. The wounds festered instead of healing, and his transformation was wrong. Incomplete. Evangeline looked around the circle of faces. I've seen similar symptoms since I arrived here. Pack members who should heal quickly but don't. Injuries that linger, strength that fades. Kane saw the moment understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. They'd lost 2 pack members over the past year to mysterious ailments that their enhanced healing couldn't touch. Injuries that should have been minor but turned septic. Illnesses that lingered for weeks instead of days. You think we've been poisoned? Elena asked. I think someone's been testing a weapon specifically designed to kill werewolves, Evangeline said grimly. And I think Marcus Thornfield knows exactly what it is. Before anyone could respond, a long howl echoed across the hills. Not a pack call, but the hunting cry of rogues who'd found their prey. They found us, Elena said grimly. How many? Kane's enhanced hearing picked out the details, multiple groups approaching from different directions, the jingle of silver weapons, the heavy breathing of horses pushed hard. 20, maybe more. Plus the hunters. We can't fight them here, Thomas said, his young face tight with fear. Not with the women and children, we don't run. Elena's voice cracked like a whip. This is our territory. Our home. Elena's right. Kane stepped into the center of the circle, assuming the natural leadership role. But we're not fighting fair. Evangeline, how much do you remember about that poison? Everything. I documented every symptom, every stage of progression. Her green eyes blazed with determination. If you have the right supplies, I might be able to create an antidote. And if you can't? Then we find another way. She looked around the circle of faces, meeting each gaze steadily. I'm not just offering medical help. I'm asking for sanctuary. For pack protection. The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Kane felt his heart stop as he realized what she was suggesting. Elena's eyes narrowed. Do you understand what you're asking for, human? I'm asking to be part of your family, Evangeline said simply. To share your risks and your protections. To belong somewhere. Pack bonds aren't temporary arrangements, Elena warned. They're permanent. Binding. And for humans. She glanced meaningfully at Kane. There are consequences. Kane stepped forward, his throat tight with panic. Evangeline didn't understand what she was offering, didn't realize that pack bonds for humans meant only one thing, mating bonds. And mating bonds with werewolves were often fatal to human women. Evangeline, I understand, she interrupted, though Kane could see in her eyes that she didn't. Not fully. I accept the consequences. Another howl, closer this time. The hunters were almost upon them. Elena looked at Kane, a silent question in her weathered face. As pack leader, the choice was his. Accept Evangeline's offer and risk her life in the mating bond, or refuse and lose their only chance of understanding the poison that was slowly killing his people. The blood moon rises tomorrow night, Elena said quietly. If you're going to claim her, it has to be then. When our power is strongest. Kane closed his eyes, his wolf howling in triumph while his human heart shattered. The blood moon, when werewolves were at their most powerful, but also their most primal. When mating bonds were forged in fire and instinct, with no room for human gentleness, when the claiming would either make Evangeline his forever, or kill her in the attempt. Kane. Evangeline's voice was soft, uncertain. What's a blood moon? Before he could answer, the first of the rogues broke through the tree line, the battle erupted with savage intensity. Werewolves poured into the clearing from 3 directions, their eyes blazing amber in the firelight. Behind them came the hunters, men in dark clothing carrying silver weapons and nets designed to capture rather than kill. Cain felt his own transformation begin as the fighting reached him. His bones cracked and reformed, muscles expanding, senses exploding into hyperfocus. Around him, his pack was doing the same, becoming the predators they were born to be, but even as he fought, part of his attention remained on Evangeline. She'd pressed herself against one of the cabins, her medical bag clutched in her hands, watching the battle with wide eyes. A rogue broke through the defensive line, heading straight for her. Cain roared a warning, but he was too far away, tangled up with two of Thornfield's hired killers. That's when Evangeline surprised everyone. Instead of running or screaming, she stepped forward and drove a silver scalpel straight into the rogue's throat. The werewolf dropped like a stone, silver poisoning spreading through his system before he could heal. Well, Elena panted, dispatching her own opponent with ruthless efficiency. The human has teeth. The battle was turning in their favor when Cain caught a familiar scent on the wind. Marcus Thornfield himself, approaching from the east with a small group of his most dangerous hunters. Elena. Cain called out. Thornfield's coming. Get the others to safety. What about you? Cain looked at Evangeline, who was now kneeling beside a wounded pack member, her hands steady as she worked to stop the bleeding. Her medical training had kicked in, overriding her fear. I'm staying, he said. Someone needs to end this. Elena nodded grimly and began barking orders to retreat. The pack would regroup at the secondary camp, 10 miles deeper in the territory. But Cain couldn't leave. Not with Evangeline here, not with Thornfield so close that as the last of his people disappeared into the forest, Cain found himself alone in the clearing with Evangeline and 3 wounded pack members too injured to move. Can you help them? He asked, crouching beside her. 2 of them, yes. But this one. She gestured to a young wolf named Marcus whose chest had been laid open by silver claws. The poison is already spreading. Without an antidote, he'll die within the hour. Cain felt his heart clench. Marcus was barely 18, the youngest member of their pack. He joined them only 6 months ago, fleeing an abusive alpha in Montana. Then we make an antidote, Cain said grimly. I need supplies. A proper laboratory. Time to test. You don't have any of those things. Marcus Thornfield's voice cut through the clearing like a blade. But you do have something I want. Cain spun around to find Thornfield emerging from the trees, flanked by 6 hunters. The man had shed his human facade entirely, his eyes glowed amber, his canines had extended into fangs, and his fingernails had sharpened into claws. Marcus, Cain said evenly. Come to finish what you started? Oh, I'm just getting started. Thornfield's smile was all predator. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Sheriff. What you've interrupted. Enlighten me. Thornfield gestured to his men, who began spreading out to surround the clearing. There are people back east, Cain. Wealthy, powerful people who collect rare and exotic things. And nothing is more exotic than a werewolf pelt. Cain felt his blood turn to ice. You're hunting us for sport? For profit. A prime alpha pelt can fetch $50,000 from the right collector. Beta pelts go for 20. Even the runts are worth 5,000 each. Thornfield's gaze flicked to the wounded pack members. Of course, they have to be taken alive. The transformation has to be witnessed to verify authenticity. You sick bastard. I'm a businessman. And business has been very, very good. Thornfield's attention shifted to Evangeline. But you, my dear doctor, have created a problem for me. Those notes you took in Chicago, the documentation of werewolf physiology, my clients would pay handsomely for that information. Evangeline lifted her chin defiantly. I'll never help you. Oh, but you will. Because if you don't, I'll kill every member of Cain's pack slowly, one by one, while you watch. Thornfield's smile widened. Starting with the boy. He gestured to young Marcus, who was growing weaker by the moment. The poison was spreading faster now, dark veins visible beneath his pale skin. I have the antidote, Thornfield continued conversationally. A simple compound that neutralizes the toxin. One injection, and he'll be fine. All you have to do is ask nicely. Kane felt his control slipping, felt his wolf clawing at the edges of his consciousness. The need to protect his pack, to defend his territory, was overwhelming every rational thought. Don't, Evangeline said softly, her hand touching his arm. Don't give him what he wants. But Marcus, we'll die if we don't try something else. She looked up at him, her green eyes blazing with determination. You said the blood moon makes you stronger. More powerful. Can you share that power? Kane stared at her, understanding dawning. The mating bond. If we complete it during the blood moon, you'd have access to pack magic. Enhanced healing. Could I use that to save him? Kane's throat closed. The mating bond during a blood moon was dangerous enough under ideal circumstances. Attempting it in the middle of a battle, while under extreme stress, would likely kill them both, but it was their only chance. Yes, he said hoarsely. But Evangeline, you don't understand what you're asking for. The bond, it's permanent. Forever. And if your body can't handle the change, I understand. She cupped his face in her hands, her touch gentle despite the chaos around them. I've been running my whole life, Kane. From my past, from my responsibilities, from any chance of real connection. I'm tired of running. Thornfield's laughter cut through their moment. How touching. But I'm afraid you won't be mating with anyone, Sheriff. My clients prefer their specimens unmarked. The hunters raised their weapons, not guns, but strange devices that hummed with electrical energy. Capture weapons, designed to subdue without killing. Kane felt the change take him completely as rage overwhelmed his control. His bones cracked and reformed, muscles expanding, until he stood 9 feet tall with claws like razors and teeth like knives. Around him, the air itself seemed to thicken with supernatural power. The blood moon was rising. Run, he growled to Evangeline, his voice barely recognizable. Get to the others. Not without you. Kane looked down at her, this brave, stubborn, impossible woman who'd walked into his life and turned everything upside down. Who was willing to risk everything to save his people, who was offering him forever, even if she didn't fully understand what that meant. The moon's light was growing stronger, calling to the wolf inside him. Soon, he'd lose all human restraint, become pure predator and instinct. If they were going to attempt the mating bond, it had to be now. Hold on to me, he said, pulling her against his chest. And whatever happens, don't let go. Evangeline wrapped her arms around him as the first of the capture weapons fired. The electrical blast hit Kane like a sledgehammer, but the blood moon's power absorbed most of the impact. Around them, the clearing erupted into chaos as more rogues poured from the forest. But Kane's attention had narrowed to the woman in his arms, to the ancient magic beginning to flow between them. The mating bond was starting, whether they were ready or not, and somewhere in the distance, young Marcus was dying. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The blood moon hung like a crimson eye in the star-scattered sky, bathing the forest clearing in ethereal light that made everything look dipped in fresh blood. Kane could feel its power coursing through his veins, amplifying every werewolf instinct until his human consciousness was barely a whisper beneath the wolf's primal song. That Evangeline's arms tightened around him as another capture weapon discharged, its electrical net crackling through the air where they'd been standing moments before. Kane's enhanced reflexes had gotten them clear, but barely. The bond, Evangeline gasped against his chest. Kane, I can feel something happening. He could feel it too. Threads of silver fire connecting them, ancient magic older than human civilization awakening in response to the moon's call. But the mating bond needed time to complete properly, time they didn't have with hunters closing in from all sides. It's not safe, Kane growled, his voice distorted by the partial shift. If we're interrupted, then we don't get interrupted. Evangeline pulled back to look at him, her green eyes blazing with determination. Your pack member is dying, Kane. How long does he have? Kane's enhanced senses focused on young Marcus, who lay 20 feet away, growing weaker by the moment. The dark veins of poison had spread up his neck, and his breathing was growing shallow. Minutes. Maybe less. Then we don't have a choice. Before Kane could protest, Evangeline pressed her lips to his. The kiss was fierce, desperate, and it sent the mating bond surging between them like wildfire. Kane felt her human strength and courage flowing into him even as his supernatural power wrapped around her fragile mortality. The bond was dangerous, potentially fatal for humans. But as Kane tasted Evangeline's fierce spirit, felt the steel backbone that had carried her through a lifetime of adversity, he began to hope that maybe, just maybe, she was strong enough to survive what was coming. A crossbow bolt whistled past Kane's ear, shattering the moment. Marcus Thornfield's hunters had surrounded the clearing, their silver weapons gleaming in the blood moon's light. Touching, Thornfield called out from the tree line. But playtime's over, Sheriff. Surrender now, and I might let the good doctor live long enough to see you skinned. Kane's answering roar shook the forest canopy. He set Evangeline gently on her feet, his claws extending as he prepared to fight. Stay behind me. No matter what happens, Kane. Evangeline's voice was strangely calm. Look. Kane followed her gaze to see shapes moving through the forest, not hunters, but werewolves. Dozens of them, emerging from the shadows with the fluid grace of apex predators. But their scents were wrong, corrupted somehow, carrying the acrid tang of madness and violence. Rogues, Kane breathed. But so many, not rogues, Thornfield's voice carried clearly across the clearing. Recruits. The man himself stepped into view, flanked by the largest werewolves Kane had ever seen. But it was Thornfield himself who made Kane's blood run cold. The rancher's form was shifting, bones cracking and reforming as he embraced a transformation that was both powerful and wrong. Thornfield's wolf form was massive, easily twice the size of a normal werewolf, but his fur was shot through with silver, and his eyes burned with an unnatural crimson light. This wasn't the clean transformation of a natural-born werewolf. This was something corrupted, twisted by unnatural means. Surprised, Sheriff? Thornfield's voice was a rumbling growl as his transformation completed. Did you really think I was just some human hunter? I've been a werewolf longer than you've been alive. Impossible, Elena's voice came from the forest edge. Kane's second-in-command emerged from the shadows with the rest of their pack, having doubled back when they'd heard the fighting. No werewolf would hunt his own kind. My own kind? Thornfield threw back his massive head and laughed, a sound like grinding stone. I transcended that weakness decades ago. Do you know what I discovered in my travels back east, Sheriff? Power. Real power. Not this primitive pack nonsense, but the ability to command armies. More corrupted werewolves poured from the forest, at least 50 of them, their eyes all bearing that same unnatural crimson glow. Kane realized with growing horror that these weren't just rogues. They were werewolves who'd been changed somehow, their natural instincts perverted into blind obedience. You're creating an army, Kane said. I'm creating an empire. Thornfield's crimson gaze swept over Kane's pack with predatory hunger. Every pack I destroy gives me new soldiers. Every alpha I kill makes me stronger. Soon, I'll have enough power to take this war beyond the frontier. To the cities back east, where the Real prizes wait. Elena stepped forward, her own transformation beginning. You're insane if you think werewolves can rule over humans. Rule over them? Thornfield's laughter was like breaking glass. My dear woman, I don't want to rule over them. I want to replace them entirely. The battle erupted without warning. Thornfield's corrupted wolves crashed into Kane's pack like a crimson tide, their unnatural strength and speed overwhelming through sheer numbers. Kane found himself separated from Evangeline in the chaos, fighting desperately to reach her as hunters moved in with their capture weapons. The blood moon's power surged through him, making him faster and stronger than he'd ever been. His claws tore through corrupted flesh like paper, and his roar sent lesser wolves scrambling for cover. But there were too many of them, and they kept coming in endless waves. Kane! Evangeline's scream cut through the battle noise, Kane spun to see her surrounded by 3 of Thornfield's hunters, their electrical nets closing in. She fought like a wildcat, her silver scalpel flashing as she slashed at their weapons, but she was only human. Only mortal. Kane launched himself toward her, but Thornfield's massive form slammed into him mid-leap, sending them both crashing through the trees. The corrupted Alpha's strength was incredible, fueled by whatever unnatural process had created him. Did you really think you could protect her? Thornfield's claws raked across Kane's chest, opening wounds that burned like acid. She's human, Sheriff. Weak. Fragile. Everything you're not. Kane's vision blurred as silver poison spread through his system. Thornfield's claws had been treated with the same toxin that was killing young Marcus. What did you do to yourself? I found a way to combine werewolf strength with human technology. Thornfield's crimson eyes blazed with mad triumph. Silver no longer weakens me, it makes me stronger. And every werewolf I kill adds their power to mine. Through their incomplete mating bond, Kane could feel Evangeline's terror as the hunters dragged her away. She was calling his name, fighting against the electrical restraints that held her, but her human strength wasn't enough. Let her go, Kane growled, struggling to rise despite the poison burning through his veins. Your fight is with me. Oh, but she's so much more useful than you realize. Thornfield's massive head tilted with predatory amusement. You see, I've been studying the mating bond for years. Did you know that when one mate dies, the other usually follows within hours? Something about shared souls and mystical connections. Horror crashed over Kane as he understood. No. Yes. Kill the human, and you'll be too grief-stricken to fight effectively. Or better yet. Thornfield's smile revealed teeth like razors. Force her transformation during the blood moon. If she survives, I'll have leverage over you forever. If she doesn't, your heart breaks along with the bond. Kane tried to surge to his feet, but the silver poison had spread too far. His enhanced healing couldn't cope with the corrupted toxin, and his vision was growing dark around the edges. Through the bond, he felt Evangeline's fear spike as Thornfield's hunters dragged her toward the center of the clearing. Felt her desperately trying to reach him through their connection. Kane, her voice whispered in his mind, the bond carrying her thoughts despite the distance. The antidote. I figured out how to make it. Kane's heart leaped. How? The poison isn't just silver, it's silver combined with a specific plant extract. Something that prevents supernatural healing by disrupting the body's ability to regenerate tissue. But if I can get to your medical supplies, Kane forced himself to focus, to push through the poison's effects. Evangeline was brilliant, of course she'd figure out the cure. But she was also trapped, surrounded by enemies with no way to reach the supplies she needed, unless, the mating bond, Kane projected to her. If we complete it, you'll have access to pack magic. Enhanced healing, increased strength. Enough to fight back, but the risk, I trust you, Kane sent, pouring all his love and faith through their connection. Your spirit is stronger than any of them know. You can survive this. Evangeline's response came back flooded with determination and love so fierce it took his breath away. Then let's save our pack. The bond between them flared like a star going nova. Kane felt Evangeline's human courage and intelligence flowing into him even as his supernatural strength wrapped around her mortality. The blood moon's power amplified their connection, turning it into something unprecedented. A perfect fusion of human adaptability and werewolf power. Evangeline's scream echoed across the clearing, but it wasn't a sound of pain. It was a battle cry. Kane's vision cleared as their shared power burned the poison from his system. He surged to his feet in time to see Evangeline break free from her electrical restraints, her human hand somehow channeling enough supernatural strength to snap the cables like thread. The transformation was beginning in her, but it wasn't the violent, destructive change that killed most humans who attempted the mating bond. Instead, it was controlled, purposeful, her medical knowledge allowing her to guide her body's metamorphosis rather than being overwhelmed by it. Impossible, Thornfield breathed, his crimson eyes fixed on Evangeline as she moved through his hunters like a force of nature. Her silver scalpels flashed in the moonlight, finding arteries and nerve clusters with surgical precision. You don't know her, Kane said, his own transformation completing as the bond's power flowed through him. You don't know what humans are capable of when they have something worth fighting for. Cain and Thornfield crashed together in the center of the clearing, two alphas locked in mortal combat. But Thornfield's corrupted strength was no match for the pure power flowing through Cain, power amplified by his bond with Evangeline, by her fierce human spirit merged with his werewolf nature. Around them, the battle was turning. Elena and the pack were fighting with renewed vigor, inspired by their alpha pair's transformation. And Evangeline. Evangeline was magnificent. She moved through the chaos like an avenging angel, her partially transformed state giving her supernatural speed and strength while retaining her human intelligence and medical expertise. Every strike was precise, calculated to disable rather than kill. Every movement was economical, efficient, deadly. How? Thornfield gasped as Cain's claws found his throat. How is she surviving the change? Because she's not just human, Cain said, his voice carrying the authority of a true alpha. She's Luna. She's Pack. And we protect our own. Cain's claws tore out Thornfield's throat in a spray of corrupted blood. The rogue alpha fell, his crimson eyes dimming as his twisted life finally ended. The moment Thornfield died, his army of corrupted wolves collapsed. Whatever process had bound them to his will died with him, leaving them confused and leaderless. Most fled into the forest. The few that remained submitted to Elena's authority, their natural pack instincts reasserting themselves. The battle was over. Cain found Evangeline kneeling beside young Marcus, her transformed hands glowing with soft silver light as she worked to heal his poison wounds. The antidote she'd synthesized using pack magic was already taking effect, the dark veins fading from his skin. Will he live? Cain asked, settling beside her. He'll live, Evangeline said, her voice carrying a new harmonic that spoke of the wolf now sharing her soul. They all will. Cain looked around the clearing at his pack, wounded but alive, stronger somehow for having faced this trial together. Elena was organizing the cleanup, her usual efficiency unchanged despite the night's chaos. The younger wolves were tending to their injuries, their healing already accelerated by the pack's renewed sense of unity, and at the center of it all was Evangeline, his mate, his Luna, the missing piece he'd never known he needed. So, she said, turning to face him with eyes that now held flecks of amber alongside the green. What happens now? Cain cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the strength he could feel beneath her skin. The transformation had changed her, but not diminished her. If anything, she seemed more herself than ever, brilliant, determined, unbreakable. Now we build something new, he said. A pack that bridges two worlds. Human knowledge and werewolf strength. Medicine and magic. Evangeline smiled, and it was radiant as the rising sun. I like the sound of that. Around them, the pack was already adapting to their new Luna. Elena approached with a respectful nod, offering Evangeline a cloak woven from silver thread, the traditional garment of a pack's female leader. Welcome home, Luna, Elena said formally. Evangeline accepted the cloak with the grace of someone born to leadership. But when she looked at Cain, her expression was soft with wonder and joy. Home, she repeated, as if testing the word. I'd almost forgotten what that felt like. Cain pulled her into his arms as the blood moon began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Around them, their pack was already beginning to heal, to grow stronger from the night's trials. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Cain felt truly complete. The lonely sheriff who'd carried his burdens in isolation was gone, replaced by an alpha who would never have to face the darkness alone again, and beside him stood his Luna, brilliant, brave, unbreakable Evangeline, who'd traveled 1,000 miles looking for a new life and found instead a destiny neither of them could have imagined. The hunt was over. The pack was safe, and their story, the story of the sheriff and his mysterious bride, was just beginning. As the sun rose over the forest, painting everything in shades of gold and promise, Cain and Evangeline stood together at the threshold of their new life. Behind them lay the shadows of their past, her desperate flight from danger, his lonely vigil in the wilderness. Ahead stretched infinite possibilities, a future they would build together with supernatural strength and very human love. In the distance, a wolf howled, not in mourning or warning, but in pure joy. The sound was taken up by others, until the entire forest rang with the music of a pack celebrating its new beginning. Cain smiled and pulled his Luna closer, breathing in her scent, wildflowers and determination, with an underlying note of something wild and free that would forever mark her as his home at last. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.